Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast. My name is Nathan.
I'm Anna.
And we are here to talk today about how we can better love God and use tech. This is a ministry. Gospel Tech is a ministry of Flint and Iron, a nonprofit we started a few years ago to spark positive purpose in youth. And this specific ministry of Gospel Tech is really about how do we raise healthy youth in a tech world.
Today, we're going to talk about why your family needs a tech policy. This is our second episode in this back to school series. And we're diving in this series to reestablishing tech norms. So if you missed last week, we'd really encourage you to go back and give it a listen. It's an interview with our friend Roger Smith, who is a teacher and coach and a vice president of NBC camps. Raj talks tech, school, kids, life, and how he's seen technology change in the classroom with his own family as he's hired teens and college kids to come coach, and how the impact that that's had across a generation that he's seen grow up.
Yeah.
And he is one of our favorite people. So we know you'll be encouraged and blessed and challenged by what Raj and Ethan talk about in that one. So if you didn't listen to that one, go back and give it a listen. Today, we're going to jump into why a tech policy for your family can be helpful. This feels like a good time to establish some boundaries as kids are going back to some type of schooling rhythm, whatever that might look like for your family. And it's going to probably be changing or adjusting as the school year goes on. But as I know in our little family, just even having some type of rhythm of school feels like, okay, maybe we can settle into some things that fell to the wayside with COVID and with summer and the loss of structure we had. So, we're going to be talking about what tech policy is and why it will help equip your family for success.
Yes, we're excited for this because it is something we are actively working through. And then in talking with our friends and feedback from listeners and engagement on social media, realizing like a lot of us acted like this or thought this was going to be a temporary thing. Like the normal is going to come around just around the corner. We're just a few days, few weeks, whatever, another phase away from life being basically back to normal. And here we are 6 or 7 months later, and we're realizing like we let some things go. So that's where we're headed today, and we are really excited to have you on this conversation. So let's get this conversation started. Welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast, a resource for parents who are feeling outpaced and overwhelmed as they raise children in a tech world. As an educator, parent, and tech user, I want to equip parents with the tools, resources, and confidence they need to raise kids who love God and use tech. I did want to just take a quick moment to do some housekeeping. Thank you to all of our listeners, to everyone who's making time to be a part of this podcast, to people who are sharing it. Our weekly regular listenership, I think, audience has almost doubled in the last 2 weeks. So that's amazing. That doesn't happen without you guys leaving reviews, rating this podcast, and then telling other people how it's helping you. And that's really the highest compliment and also the most effective way. Because like all of us, right, there's tens of thousands of podcasts. So why would someone tune into this podcast? It's generally because someone told them or posted about it and said, hey, this was really helpful. And they go, you know what? I want to know more about that. So thank you to everyone who's done that. If you do want more information on Flint and Iron Ministries, you can go to flintandiron.org. You can find all our info on there, and you can DM us directly through social media. So at Flint and Iron if you're on Instagram, or at Sparking Purpose if you are on the Facebooks. And then the last little piece would be just this video series. So I literally read a text to Anna right before recording this that the video online workshop is coming. It is going online as of tomorrow as the recording of this podcast, but basically very, very soon it's going to be online. And what that means is we will have an online resource for families to actually lead, or parents to lead their own families through. So yes, I'll still be leading workshops, and those will kind of be the big picture kind of introduction to this idea of gospel tech and how does the gospel and technology connect. But then I really am passionate about equipping parents to do the work of raising their children in the way they should go. I don't want to usurp your authority as a parent and go, well, Nathan said you should do this, so listen to him. Like, you have reasons, you know your kids, and this video series equips you to raise them up and basically build a family tech framework so that you can have an agreement and a consistent set of boundaries with your technology that your family has made and everyone's got a voice in making. So really excited for that. Actually, we just had 2 churches purchase it sight unseen, that's crazy. Thank you.
So
guys.
it's a video series and a workbook is what is coming out. So stay tuned for more information on how you can get that.
You would think in all those words I would have covered that, but there it is.
Very excited that it's coming.
I'm excited. I have all the words. So that's it. All right. Icebreaker.
What are you looking forward to this fall?
Excuse me. One of my pumpkin spice lattes. Is that not acceptable?
Basic. Basic Becky.
Sorry, Becky. That was rude, Anna. I really am excited for something that feels like a normal rhythm. I'm really hoping that picking up school will make it feel a little bit less Groundhog's Day.
Then we have Henry to thank for our rhythm.
Yeah, we're gonna have Henny go back to some kind of a schooling situation and homeschool the Owen, which we'll see. So that's what I don't know. That's what I'm hoping for and excited for.
Yeah.
How about you?
I'm looking forward to the fair drive-through food program that's
Washington
happening.
State Fair, which
we missed this summer.
Everyone knows it's Pure Fair.
That we missed the summer one, and there's no fair. It's the first time, maybe since World War II. Is that what
Since the beginning of time.
Since the beginning of the fair, I feel like there was one small time, like a World War.
Yeah.
Perhaps when they couldn't run the fair. This is the second time. So I feel like that's a big part of our September, but they are opening on the weekends you can drive through and get food. So we are marking our calendar to be there.
We may not get the fun of the fair, but we will get all of the calories.
Without any of the walking, which is the worst part anyway.
We will walk by, you will shovel it straight into our mouths, and we will pay good money for it.
Yeah.
No, that is going to be exciting. We'll just footnote this. We'll tease out another thing we're excited for. We did a thing this weekend, everybody. 2 days ago.
I'm not happy about it yet, and I'm not excited to talk about it yet. You can tease it.
I don't think we should tease it. So you guys have been with us as we've talked about, like, what does tech look like in the family? We are very much trying to work this out in our own family. And a few days ago, we're like, well, we should change the way our living room is. Kind of inspired by the Tech-Wise family. Andy Crouch talks about what's the center of kind of your living space. And for us, it was this giant TV that we watch a couple days a week. And so we're like, well, if we're going to change that, we need some other changes to happen, including this couch. So long story short, 12 hours later, we don't have a couch. It's completely gone. We haven't purchased a new one.
Somebody's coming to buy our TV. We have no plan to replace anything.
We're just like midair. It's like we got launched out of a catapult and we're like,
it was a very rash. I feel like this is maybe like, we've probably had 3 or 4 like COVID. I'm blaming COVID again for this.
Yeah, sure. That's fair.
This is up there on the 2020. Like, what happened?
What happened? We literally have an empty living room.
Henry's bad haircut.
Yes.
Is up there.
So good.
We sold the couch.
Yeah.
There's a couple things.
Yeah. So we will keep you posted, but I'm excited for the fall because this will probably be solved by then. I look
you can
forward
pray
to,
for us.
Yeah.
It's not going well.
Yeah. Please don't think that just because we talk about this and do all the research that we somehow it magically applies itself to our lives.
Not always happy about
we're still working through
having the tech that I want.
Yeah. Which brings us to a family tech policy. So what is a family tech policy?
I thought you were going to answer that question, but
really?
I can answer that question.
Oh, sorry. We didn't put that there. Go ahead.
Well, I'll say it, and then you
you're more concise.
fill in the gaps.
I'll use the words.
I think in my head, and this is going to be with that workbook piece, like that will be more fleshed out. But just for what we're talking about today, a family tech policy is just kind of a guideline of this is what we're going to agree to as a family unit that for our phone use and our TV use, any media consumption, these are kind of some parameters around those things.
Boom.
Right?
Yep.
And I feel like the key word and we'll talk about this, is that it's a family tech policy. It's not a kid tech policy.
Yeah.
Especially if you're having older kids, I feel like we're still kind of in little kid land where they're not always aware, like, they go to bed and they think everyone else goes to bed, right? Like they don't, so they're not super aware yet of what's happening always. But I feel like with the older kids, like, man, there's gotta be buy-in. Like, and this is maybe this is coming from our teacher background. This is such a back to school, like we're going to establish our classroom norms and like
the norms.
We're going to all be on the same page. But it's true. Like we're going to talk about what it means to respect people and what does that look like? And if I have this scenario and you're doing this, let's talk about it. So we are not surprised by things.
Yeah. And I'm just on that, like, so I don't know if you have any experience as a teacher with this idea of norms, but basically the concept is
I'm sure they happen in a business.
At a business somewhere, right? It's pain. Like for me, that causes me physical pain because I know someone's going to put up a slide of Norm from Cheers.
Now, when you
and it's
say
going to be
Norm,
a joke. Yeah.
What I'm hearing you say.
Oh, it's so painful. So many like stereotypical.
Important.
But it really is important. Like it's so stereotypical and cliche. But this idea of establishing, right?
Did somebody do that?
Every time someone would do that for 10 straight years, Norm from Cheers would be like, ha ha ha, Norm, like, oh. So the cringe is real.
Get you a picture of Norm.
No, but here's the deal. So I would literally did this, and in teaching, this would literally look like, what does it look like to be kind? And you have kids write down what they believe it looks like to be kind, and then share it, and it feels cheesy and kumbaya-ish, and it would work.
Because then when somebody's not kind, you have your poster up on the wall that
Yes.
says, "Now Nathan, you just called Jill
this terrible name.
word." Now, on our policy, that doesn't seem to reflect kindness. Would you agree? And I see here that you signed your name to the policy that we all agreed on.
Yeah.
And now Nathan has nothing to argue with because he did sign his name and he agreed to the policy. So now, as teacher or parent, we just get to facilitate this conversation instead of, and we're going to get into this.
Yeah, we'll get in there.
It
Don't steal our
alleviates
thunder.
some of the, like, I have to police every action. It's like, no, we have this third party here.
Right.
That we all agreed to it ahead of time, and we're going to look to that for our standard.
Yeah, it really is a nice, so making this, and we'll get into that and we'll kind of explain why that matters. But the tech policy is great for that. Great job, Anna. And I think just the why do we need one then? Well, at the end of the day, a tech policy emulates the way God treats us. He doesn't rule us with an iron hammer, right? In fact, he's notable for being long-suffering and steadfast in his love, Psalm 86:5 or Exodus 34:6. He doesn't micromanage our decisions, right? We have to believe when we read the Bible that Adam and Eve were given a real choice in the garden. There was a tree there that represented the ability or the opportunity to trust and love God. And when they didn't follow him, he's still faithful. And we see that repeated in the New Testament, 2 Timothy 2:13, right? When we are faithless, he remains faithful because he can't leave himself, right? He can't break his own promises. And he made a promise to never leave us or forsake us. So that is how we're now going to love our kids. We're still allowing them their choices, and we are faithfully pursuing them because we love them. So in a tech policy, that means you don't have to know every app, every game, every meme, every GIF on the internet. You know and love your child, and that becomes the basis for the tech conversation. It equips you, a tech policy equips you to fight for your family, not just with them when it comes to tech. And so I think that's what I'm excited about for this conversation. And for the ones coming forward is when we talk about reestablishing tech norms, which now that's ruined. But when it reestablishing tech boundaries, the heart behind it is the hope we have in Christ for our families, for our own purpose, and living that out so that God can be glorified and that we can be most satisfied in him, to use the John Piperism, which I really like. So first...
Well, let's tell people where we're going.
Yeah. Let's do that.
We have 3 reasons why you need a tech policy if you don't already have one. Okay, are you ready for number 1?
I'm ready. I'm going to tackle number 1.
Well,
all right, let's do it. The first one is going to be this idea of natives versus nomads when it comes to a tech landscape. So here's the kind of idea. So tech native would be someone who is born in a tech world. They use an iPad before the age of 2, right? It is natural. This is Hadley, our 17-month-old now. Hadley knows how to zoom in on a picture. She knows how to swipe through photos. She knows
Thanks, Papa.
Thanks, Papa Greg. She knows what a smartwatch is, right? Like Hadley, it's normal for her. It's around her all the time. She's going to have a very hard time caring about our very non-tech upbringings, right? Whereas a tech nomad is in between the two worlds. And here's kind of what I would just say. Here's some examples. You might be a tech nomad if you remember when there was literally nothing on TV. Remember that? Remember if you'd wake up too early and the colored bars.
I actually don't remember that, but I remember some of the others. I mean, I'm just a couple of years
Oh my
younger
goodness,
than you.
I'm just like so young.
I'm
well,
sure that happened. I just don't remember
yeah,
it.
I could also have said, you've ever been paid $0.25 to go change the knob?
Yes,
on the
I was
TV.
the youngest kid. I always had to get up and change.
There you go. Your phone ever had a cord?
Yep.
If you remember show times, like TGIF, like you actually were like, oh, we're going to watch this show, like mark it out in the calendar because no one can figure out how to program a VHS. It just wasn't.
Everywhere you look.
Everywhere there's Full House and some throwbacks.
So many good shows.
And remember when video killed the radio star? If you can
do.
impersonate the sound of a dial-up internet. Anna, can you do that? There you go. And if you remember the invention of call waiting and how that changed your life.
We never had that. You were fancy.
So fancy in my house. Call waiting. Oh, I'm sorry. It's beeping over. Can you hold just a moment? So those are tech nomad things. And the reason being, we know a world, yes, we have smartphones and fast internet and all those things, but we remember a world where that wasn't normal for us, right? It was just something we enjoy and we can actually recognize like, man, I can recognize changes in my behavior because of this tech. Whereas if you grew up, tech natives are growing up with smartphones being normal, right? They use an iPad before they can read. They believe multitasking digital tasks makes you more efficient. They have more friends online than in real life. They probably play some form of video games, both boys and girls. They do a majority of their work on a personal computer. They've been offended by the punctuation in a text.
Oh, I can relate to that.
Yeah. And
Why did you just write K? The letter K is offensive. You're mad at me.
You're mad at me. Clearly, we need an intervention. But many of you who are adults listening to this, you probably go, well, you know what? I actually do identify with a bunch of those, and that's great. But you also identify with ones in the left column, right? We've been around tech long enough where, yes, we are with it enough to understand that punctuation now matters in text and you don't write in all caps because you're yelling. But we also remember, you know what, like I can walk away from this and survive, right? Like it would be inconvenient. I would have a hard time with maybe some of the communication for work. Whereas some young people, like the anxiety of being away from their phone is a real condition that we're learning how to combat. So when we talk about native versus nomad, that's what we're talking about. And I just want to kind of, I want to paint a picture for this world we're in. This isn't just kind of anecdotal, look at your own life, now look at your kids these days kind of stuff. Let's just take, starting in 2006, the top 5-6 companies in the world.
So this is all just to talk about
just the context of native versus nomad.
Policy because this is a very, like, I feel like we have some families and we know some people who are like, I would just rather not acknowledge that what is happening in the tech landscape, right?
Thank you. Yes.
So just to come back to why are we talking about this right now?
Yeah, so the tech policies, again, they set a family norm and they allow you to have an open conversation rather than hiding from it, either through trying to keep our children ignorant of what's happening or just ignoring it and figuring like, well, I turned out fine, so my kids will turn out fine. And we just need to kind of set some reality in, well, what is actually happening? Is this the same stuff you had? Is it just the same thing as television? Or is it a different beast? And this is one of my go-tos for it. So when we just look at the way the global landscape has changed when it comes to companies, if you go 14 years ago in 2006, the top 6 companies were ExxonMobil, GE, Microsoft, Citigroup, British Petroleum, and Shell. So you have an oil company, an everything company, GE does everything, a tech company, a bank, an oil company, and an oil company. And they're anywhere from $200 billion to $360 billion of value at that time. If you go to last year, 2019, the top 6 companies were Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet, the parent company of Google, Berkshire Hathaway, and Facebook. So you have a tech company, a tech company, a tech company, a tech company, an everything company who basically just owns a bunch of tech companies, and a tech company. And they range from a $500 billion company is the lowest to a $1 trillion company is the top 4. Okay? So when we talk about that, we're not just talking about a passive process where, well, there's businesses and that's just what it is. We're talking about the tech our kids are engaging are being run by $1 trillion companies that are highly effective at applying that tech to gain more attention, and that we need to be an active part of that process with our kids, not just try to save them from it, but to actually be in the conversation with them. And
Right.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, just that I think that the temptation is just to pretend like if we don't deal with it, it'll go away. But that's clearly not the case.
Yeah, if I could just take a quick tangent on here, one of my favorite examples of just where this is headed. So in 2013, Amazon purchased a patent for this idea of pre-selling you items. And in 2013, it was insane and people kind of made fun of it. But 7 years later, things like Stitch Fix exist. And if you're not familiar with that, you basically sign up for clothing and you say, here's how old I am, here's what I like to wear. You click on some pictures and they send you a box of clothes. You take what you want, you send back what you don't, and you don't have to pay for what you didn't keep. Well, Amazon wants to start doing that with items. So basically you'll sign up for a program, and based on the algorithm that knows who you are and what you like, they'll just ship you a box of awesome stuff. It's basically like Costco sent to your door, right? The idea here is you will only keep what you want. And the reason they can do that is they know so much about you and they're so good at what they do. It'll be like, yeah, like Costco, all the best things you never knew you wanted just sent into your front door. Mm-hmm. And that's what's happening with our young people is they're being convinced they need things they never wanted because this world is absolutely inundated with ads and with selling and with consuming as entertainment. And we just want to make sure that we are the ones driving the conversation. We're not abdicating our opportunities to feed their hearts and point them back towards the real source of hope. We know that consuming can be good, but it needs to have limits and it can't bring us real hope. So that's the first reason we need a family tech policy.
Okay, reason number 2 is that a policy will help you fight for your family and not with them. So it puts everybody on the same team.
Yeah.
So one thing I feel like that you hear a lot in teaching land is they may not remember what you taught them, but they'll never forget how you treated them. And I think growing up, like that's totally true. I'm sure you can think of a teacher that either was a negative impact or a positive impact. And I remember very little of what I actually learned in the classroom, but I remember positively the teachers who cared about me and went out of their way to invest.
Can you give one example? Pop quiz.
Give a lot of examples.
Well, let's go with the positive. Let's go with like the...
No, I'm thinking
okay.
positive.
Right.
Positive example. My art teacher in high school, Mrs. Loring, was very good at this. She just let us hang out in her classroom, and I feel like she spoke encouraging words to us. She brought chili in for lunch. I had her for like an advisory period and for art class. And
was this Team Ticonderoga?
Yes, Team Ticonderoga. We had a hand symbol and everything, which was wonderful. But she totally did like culture. Like I feel like she was kind of a funny. I mean, she was a funny like big personality, and I feel like I do actually remember some technique from an art class, very little. Okay. But I mostly remembered that like she cared about us. She had little nicknames for everybody. Like she was great.
Cool.
So then when somebody wants to give you advice, though, like I did listen to her. Like she bought in, you buy into her, and then you're happy. Like I feel like for kids, like when you know somebody cares about you, now that person has earned a right to speak truth to you when you need to hear it. And so that's kind of what this goes with too, with creating a tech policy is, especially if you have older kids, like creating buy-in for them, of them to know like we're all on the same page and you love them and you care about them and this is a two-way conversation. Doesn't mean that they get to have the final say necessarily, but they get to be a part of the conversation. And I think that's so important as your kids start hitting that 10, 11, 12 older, that they get to have a voice in it. So it's not just mom and dad coming down with a hammer.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a really big one, right? That earning the right to be heard as a parent, like you have a biblical mandate to parent your kids well, but then we have to, again, look back to how does God treat us? And he tells us the right and the wrong, right? Like he's not wrong. The Old Testament is absolutely correct. And yet we are still given this opportunity to be faithful and to follow. And we want to extend that same opportunity to our kids. We don't just let them run themselves into the ground, but we bring them into the conversation, we establish right and wrong, and then we return to that conversation as a we love you. We're not scared of the bad things in the world. We are hopeful for what you are capable of and what you were created for, and we're living in light of that hope, not just everything that could mess you up.
Yeah. So we have two little fail-proof ways. If you feel like, okay, my kid won't talk to me about tech, and maybe it's a hard conversation in your family, or it's been a point of contention for you. So here are two questions to try and, obviously, when we're having hard conversations, timing is very important.
Right.
So people are well fed, they've slept, maybe we're driving somewhere, or you launch it early in the day and say like, hey, later, let's have a little conversation. Like these can all make a conversation go better than if it's a surprise attack and your child just rolled out of bed and they haven't eaten anything. Like, I feel like just for life, like sometimes we forget, like, no, like I don't want to talk about things I don't like either when I'm tired and hungry, like, or it's 11 o'clock at night. Like, don't talk to me about these things.
We have the not after 9 p.m. rule.
Because we go to bed early.
We go to bed early.
Okay, but way number 1 to get your kid to talk about tech. The first is to ask them about their friends' tech use. So ask them how many of your friends are unhealthy with their tech use. What does that look like? That will get them talking. They know people and they can spot it when another kid is unhealthy with their gaming, or they're on social media, or they're mean texters, or whatever it is. I don't know.
Yeah.
Whatever they're doing that's not healthy, they will be able to tell you about another person, another kid who is not doing a good job.
Yeah, and be ready in this. This is not you deep diving so that you can go call people's parents and be like, I heard your kid.
No, and not condemning either. Like, just listen. Like, tell me more about that is a great follow-up. Oh, can you give me an example? Like, let's just ask open-ended. You're not trying to solve a problem. This is just to have a conversation.
Yeah. And it does matter. They will feel heard, and that does matter, especially when you reach those delightfully angsty 8th grade my little wheelhouse of people.
Yes.
Like, they just want to be heard, and they have.
That's so interesting.
I find
surprised by that. Your mom is the best.
My mom is so good.
Raylene, you do a great job of listening and not reacting.
Yep, and
really,
have for years.
Yeah,
and from that, right? Like, that doesn't mean it just ends there and you never bring that up again. But you allow those conversations to begin, and you allow some trust to be established, because middle schoolers, just any middle schoolers, yet alone in a tech age, generally feel like their parents are just attempting to run espionage and spy on them. But your kids, so you can just start like, oh, well, what games your friends like to play? Like, what apps do your friends use for social media? And like, they'll talk about their friends, and then you can get into like, oh, like what is that? What's the good part of that? Oh, have you ever seen that work badly? I do this when I do talks in public schools. And I'll be like, hey, how many of you kids, I'll ask those and be like, all right, how many of you have any friends who don't handle their tech well? Right? And you're going to have half the kids raise their hands and out their friends who may be sitting in the room, and they'll all have explanations for why it doesn't apply to them. Mm-hmm. So don't worry about connecting those dots right now. Just know that many of us as humans don't like outing our flaws, but we're more than happy to be astute in others.
Yes. So the second way to get them to talk is to ask them about your tech use.
Ooh, it's so good.
So Nathan asks this always too when he's talking with kids at school, of how many of you have parents who are on their tech too much? And a lot of them raise their hands, right? Like, they see everything and they see more than you think that they see. And I feel like this is why we're talking about a family tech policy.
Yeah. And
they notice.
Oh my goodness. Starting at age about 5 or 6. Like, when I've done these talks in elementary schools, and I can ask that question, and kids will raise their hands and be like, well, at the dinner table or in the evening, or I'll ask a parent to do this, and they'll say, well, we're not doing anything, and they're on their phone. Like, the things that they can notice and repeat. Like, it's not just, well, they're little kids, like, they'll forget about this. They are watching you. Yeah. And they are learning from it. And a great way to earn that rapport, if you are trying to win them over, is to ask them for feedback. And guess what? You don't get to defend yourself.
Ooh,
you just have to listen. It's so really hard because we all have such good reasons. We're so important.
It's so important that I look up that
Kardashian handbag.
Not what I'm looking up.
Oh.
It's important that I show you the raccoon walking on the telephone wire. That's what I have to show you.
That's it. The 2020 meme.
Okay, so that is number 2, is allowing number 2
to fight for your family, not with them. But that is good, and that leads us directly into number 3.
Number 3 is that allows you to parent, not police. So like we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, like when we were in the classroom and coming up with classroom norms, this is kind of a similar mindset of we have we're going to have this conversation about our tech use, and we're going to talk about things that we are going to agree on as a family, of maybe it's when we're using it, hours we're using it, what are we looking at, when are we not looking at, etc. And we're going to come to some type of agreement. And now that we have a baseline, then the baseline is the police instead of mom and dad, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, so we're talking gospel tech here. So we do use the Bible as our basis.
Yes.
So we believe that we have been created with a purpose. That's Ephesians 2:10, that we were saved for a purpose, that good works that God has planned beforehand for us to do. We believe that we are made in the image and likeness of God, which gives us all equal standing as children of God, and specifically the Bible would say sons of God, because that idea of inheritance, that we are all brought in with a full inheritance, including the Holy Spirit. There's no Holy Spirit 0.5 that our kids get, and then somehow they graduate to the awesome level of us. Like, our kids are in this, and we are all putting our trust in Christ. And that doesn't mean we can save our kids, but it does mean we can point them to the God who loves them, and that our daily job isn't to control them. So when we get to heaven, we'll go, look, God, I made my kid good, because that's Jesus's job. We're usurping power at that point. We can say, look, God, I loved my kid well because Jesus loved me. And that is what this whole thing is. We're going to parent, not police. Mm-hmm. And I just want to take a quick aside on that. Every time I do a workshop, I get parents that come to me and go, well, how can I know more about what my kid is doing online, right? I want to see every text. I want to see every tweet. I want to be in every web browser that they're in. I want to know where they're at. And I would just say this: if you're giving your kid the resources to get to those things, you're going to have to also give them the trust to do that well, right? And some of the space. That doesn't mean, what I don't mean is you just have to let them run willy-nilly on the internet and trust that their human nature will be magically good. It won't be.
No, I feel like that in the Boundaries book, when the Cloud and Townsend have their chapter that they added about tech. Maybe they added about tech, but there's also one they talk about teens, of not, like, especially teens are earning trust, right? It's like you give them a little bit. If they're faithful with the little bit, they might get a little more. But if they're not, like, if they've not proven to be able to follow through on coming home on time, they're not following through on, well, we talked about only looking at these websites. Okay, then the leash comes in and you don't get as much freedom. Like, you're earning freedom, and you get to keep freedom when you've maintained that, right?
Yeah, and I think, so there's two things I want to go off that. The first is this idea, the second will be accountability, so I'll come back to that. The first is this idea that when you're faithful in the little things, you'll be trusted with more. So let's not see technology as something totally different from the rest of life. So yes, being faithful with grades can tie over to tech, and vice versa. If you are skipping...
Oh, that's not what I meant. I meant, like, whatever age you've given your kid any tech, right?
Yes.
Like, okay, can you turn off the video game and you're done with the video game? Okay, like, maybe we can talk about, like, when you get to whatever age we've decided for you to have a flip phone. Maybe now that's an option because you've been responsible with the tech use we've had previous.
Yeah, and I think and I was just saying I think it ties that side of tech too. Okay. Like, so I see sometimes kids lose all of their priorities, but parents feel that they are being draconian and unruly if they take away the smartphone, right? Or they take away this technology because, well, sure, you've blown trust in all these areas, but you deserve that. It's basically a human right now. And I would disagree.
It's not a human right.
It's not a human right. Although
maybe for grown-ups, if you're an adult, yes, right?
Again, there's a bigger conversation there. Bigger conversation. But
your child.
Your child's
not a person yet.
Your child is made in the image of God and has full value, and in doing that needs to show that they can handle that whole process. So then that brings us to the accountability part, because, and I want to make sure I'm very clear on this. No, you do not need to follow your kids' every move because you're showing that you do not trust them. So either they haven't earned the trust to have this technology, or all they need is another set of eyes. So we are given that promise that God will never leave us or forsake us. But we often only repeat that promise when we're in a hard time. Like, oh, I know I'm going through this valley in life, right? The valley of the shadow of death, and this is really bad, but I know God's with me. That's great. But when we're on the mountaintop and we're feeling free and easy and we're doing what we want, we forget that God never leaves us or forsakes us. So when we're making bad choices, he's still there. And I like that picture because accountability, so Covenant Eyes is something that I'll talk about a lot, is an accountability software. While it can filter, I like it in its unfiltered use because it allows our children and ourselves to do what we want. And it allows people to be fully with us when we're doing that. So there's always going to be a second set of eyes that sees whatever you see. And I love that because it's not about catching our kids making mistakes. It's about fighting for them, not with them, right? Now I see a site come up, right? I'm going to go to my kid in love and say, hey, I love you. This came up. Let's talk about that. Is this the only time it came up? How did you find out about that? Where is this going? Are you happy with who you are when this, right? Like, let's get into some of the heart behind that. And that's, I think, a big part in the accountability piece. So whatever software you apply it out of love, not out of fear, out of hope to see them grow into Christ, not a desire to control and fix them, because that's not your job.
Yeah.
All right.
I don't know. Did I have something else?
No, you didn't have anything. I
think that's good. So those are 3. Next week, we're going to talk about how do you do this? How do you have this conversation about how to create a tech policy?
Yeah. Sorry. I just remembered a quote that you gave. I had written like the margins of the notes. Okay. Can I give it?
Yes.
Okay. So this was a parenting quote from Ted Tripp, and I just thought it was
Paul David Tripp.
Thank you, Paul David Tripp. Sorry. Paul David Tripp, that our job as parents is not about saving our kids, but loving them. And then Anna, will you say your quote that you...
Yes, I was just reading his parenting book this morning, and I feel like kind of in a nutshell, the chapter I was reading was on rest, and it just, in that, relieving some of the pressure that it's our job to save our children. Like, it is our job to disciple our children and to proclaim Jesus to them. And as Deuteronomy talks about, as you lie down and as you walk, to be just reminding them of who God is and how good he is. So it does relieve some of that pressure when we rest in Jesus, that ultimately at the end of the day, it's his job to change their hearts and capture their hearts. But also in that same conversation, and when we're talking about tech, we're talking about the family tech policy, and you have to model this tech use. We can't expect our kids to be holding to one set of values, and then we're over here like binging and addicted to our phones. We have to be consistent. The same is true with our faith. We cannot pass on a faith that we don't have. So if we're trying to disciple our kids and say, well, God says this and the Bible says this, but our faith isn't there, then it's hard to pass that on. So I feel like that book was just if you haven't read that one, Parenting is a very good, challenging.
So the book is literally called Parenting. And it's by
Paul David Tripp.
Okay.
But it is a good one. And he doesn't end it there of just like, we'll do a better job having your own faith. It was like, God will not, like, he has called you into this hard work of parenting, but he's also promised, like what Nathan just said, like, he will never leave you or forsake you. And you're not alone in this parenting journey. And if you're dealing with kids who are walking through hard things, like, that's one, you're not by yourself, and he will not he's not expecting you to do some miraculous work in your kid's life on your own. Like, he will equip you to do what you need to do, and he will give you wisdom, and he will give you what you need to do that. And two, when our kids are in hard spots, I feel like there's not been more times, like when our kids are struggling, that drives me to my knees. So I feel like that was a good encouragement too, of like, if you're in crisis or your kids are in crisis, like, yes, it's awful and it's so hard to watch your kids struggle, and like just praying that the Lord can redeem that and turn your heart to him, and like just is so revealing of our dependence on God. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I wanted to tie that in because that was such a poignant point that you'd made. And so thank you for sharing that, guys. We hope that this time in this conversation has been encouraging to you, and that it's helped you kind of reflect on, why do we need a tech policy in our family? What does that even look like to have one? And to kind of wrap that up, a tech policy best reflects the way that God treats us. That there is a right and a wrong, that there is a course of action that shows faithfulness to who God has made us to be and what he's telling us to do. And then that shows rebellion, that where we trust ourselves instead of God. But that God doesn't just bring down the hammer on us, that he is long suffering, that he is that he is gracious and merciful and abounding in love, and that we then get to love because he first loved us, right? And that we get that love by being connected to Jesus, not by knowing the Bible perfectly, not by being awesome, perfect people, but we will be more loving and gracious, and I would therefore argue awesome because we're connected to him, but that we are then extending to our kids the love we've been given. And then that's going to show up in three ways. We're going to recognize this isn't the same world we grew up in. The tech our kids have is not the same tech environment that we had as digital nomads. We may be more or less tech savvy, but the point isn't, well, I know tech, therefore I can parent my kid. It's, you don't need to know tech. You need to know your kid and then address technology out of the hope you have for your child in Christ. It puts you on the same team. Now you're not fighting against your kid, you're fighting for them. And if they start floundering or getting in trouble or getting distracted by these opportunities and things that are not helping them become more of who they could be, then you step in out of love with a common conversation, those tech norms. And finally, it allows you to parent them and not police them. You're going to be in the center of those hard conversations. And we'll address in the future, and we address through the online workshop. But the idea of like, hey, you need to address bullies and depression and pornography. Like, you need to address those things with your kid, not in a here's what's right and wrong, go do it, but a here's some of the conversation of why. Like, here's why this is not going to help you become who God has asked you to be. So that's why we need to reestablish some of our tech boundaries, and a tech policy is a wonderful way to do that.
Yes.
Anything else for the good of the order?
Nope.
All right. Fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. If you have any questions, again, you can email nathan@flintandiron.org or anna@flintandiron.org. You can reach out to us at Flint and Iron on Instagram or at Sparking Purpose on Facebook. And we are really excited to continue this third season of the podcast as we talk about how do we raise kids who love God and use tech.
Yes.
All right. See you guys.